we have to remember that everything vibrates on a certain frequency, right? So a certain plant vibrates on a certain frequency that at a certain point may elevate you, right? Where you may be in some sort of lower energy, that plant is actually going to elevate you because that frequency is vibrating a certain place. But
Mhm.
then as you start to get there on your own without the plant, or through the breath, through meditation, through authentic shadow work, with your own contemplations and journaling and all the methods that we've come to know, then you may start elevating beyond the frequency of the plant. So then when you start using the plant, it actually is going to start bringing you down in a certain sense. If we look at it in a linear, it's not always like that, but it it starts to bring a whole new level of the experience, right? So that's one thing. Now, in the new age, psychedelics has been really hyped up, obviously, and
Yeah.
I feel it's been hyped up because the common person is coming into the new age or spirituality without ever having experienced anything, and then they go and explore, say, some psychedelics or weed or something, and all of a sudden all these things are happening, things that they never thought were possible, never thought would even ever occur, and all of a sudden their whole world is shifting. So the belief in the mind is, well, it's the plant, it's like it's the psychedelics, they're so good, they give me all these new openings. And for a population that's been deeply depressed and ridden with cancer and disease and a lot of suffering, we can't really blame anyone for perceiving in that way, because it's like, well, look at all the stuff it's bringing me.
Yeah.
And that was much of my original journey. And then going into almost like 300 plus ceremonies of all kinds of plants, and having like endless journeys and endless things. I'm writing about some of them in my book. Um, but the reality is, like, they're working on so many layers that for someone to just come in and just go into that, it can be quite dangerous. And in my experience, it was, because on the first level, we have the physical level, where anytime you're using psychedelics, it's pulling energy away from your liver, kidneys, spleen, um, and it's pulling all your energy up into your brain, like the higher faculties for the most part, your nervous system. From an energetic standpoint, on the chakra level, it's opening up, it's not really opening or closing, it's just amplifying the energy in the higher chakras usually, which then can usually diminish or damage the workings of the lower chakras.
Oh.
um, which this also connects to a concept that I learned from a pretty advanced system that I work with, which is Keylontic science. And we speak a lot about DNA, like the activation of certain levels of our DNA, right? And so when we're using psychedelics, a lot of times what occurs, and this is what I had intuitively felt for a long time, like I was feeling at a certain point where, okay, I was having all these insights and I was activating all these memories of past lives and abilities and extrasensory perceptions. It was mind blowing. But then what I felt like, it was like every time I came back down, it was like too much to integrate. Like I couldn't integrate all that. It was like, what am I gonna do with all this? I could spend years on just one trip, you know?
Mhm.
Um, and so then inevitably you start losing the memory of those insights and they kind of just dissolve. And it's almost like nothing was even there. But what's actually happening on a DNA level, at least what I've come to learn and I feel is intuitively correct, is something we call a DNA compaction, which is, it's pretty much like if you put too much weight on the foundation of a house or something and it would just crack,
Mhm.
it would start to break. So that kind of is what happens on the DNA level when higher strands of your DNA are being activated without proper methodical progress from the lower chakras or the lower DNA levels that provide the foundation for these higher energies to open. But the paradox is that when you do that in a natural way, in a methodical way, using many different technologies and meditations and practices, those higher abilities and higher energies will happen anyways. You won't need anything because you're already building up progressively for that energy to naturally bloom like a flower. You're going to open up, and all the extrasensory perceptions and the insights and the abilities, that will all just naturally come. But it's going to happen in the right time,
Yeah.
right? It's going to happen like when you can correctly manage it, right? So with that said, is it like the absolute end of the world if someone has a couple experiences and things? Maybe not, but when we're speaking of like these layers of openings, we're also speaking of higher energetic layers that we're not normally consciously aware of. And in a universe and a planet that has been dealing with a lot of warfare, spiritual warfare, for a very long time,
Mhm.
we're dealing with all kinds of beings and races and energies and all kinds of things, spirits, demons, angels, all of it, that interact on these layers of our consciousness that in a human body, when we're at our normal level of consciousness, we don't generally have an awareness of until we activate authentically those levels. So I had those experiences where I was getting possessed or having channeling experiences or all these things that in many ways are glamorized within the new age that I view to be highly dangerous, and not recommended. Like I would never recommend anyone to channel anything. Even dealing with being like calling on beings and stuff for like protection, or it's like, well, do you really know this being, or are you just because you read it about it, or something like that
That's
you.
so interesting.
Yeah, I
That's
mean, we wouldn't do that in our normal life, interact with some person that we don't know. Like, of course we have to feel a resonance, and I can't be the one to tell you or anyone what that resonance is with certain beings. But at least from my 10 years of experience on this path, like exploring it, that's the last thing I want to be doing, is inviting a bunch of beings in, or, channeling things where things are taking over your body, which is highly damaging to your anatomy. These are all things that are not commonly talked about in the new age culture, but
yeah,
I don't know. And it's not popular because it's not, it's like it's just a fun thing to do, right?
yeah.
So, everyone has to explore this. I mean, I'm saying this after 300 of them. So like, of course I went very extreme.
Mhm.
So some people, may not go extreme and they may not face the challenges that I did with it. But that's not to say that that can happen in just one experience,
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
So it's just important to remind ourselves. And I feel like there is a balance to some degree, like, um, because we have to remember, this is a pretty far off topic, but it's still relevant. We do exist a part of lineages of beings that go on millions and millions, if not billions of years within the universe. So each of those race lines and different forms of expression, we call different races or forms of beings that we may have a connection to, may actually benefit from certain things that other race lines wouldn't, because it's a part of it's a part of their makeup, it's a part of where they've come from. So like one thing that again is a pretty far off topic, but it's something that I feel is absolutely very real, is that a lot of the plants, in specific, let's say marijuana, actually comes from Nibiru, which is the 13th planet. And Nibiru is, or the 12th planet, sorry, and Nibiru is the planet of the Anunnaki beings.
Mhm.
So Nibiru is like one of the controlling factions, or the Anunnaki are one of the controlling factions of this planet. So there's a lot of Anunnaki beings, and there's people that may actually have parts of their lineage connected to that may benefit in some form by using the tool, but more as a form of letting it go, because they have to come back to an original aspect of themselves. Um, so we all have different histories and karma that will make us more predisposed to certain things. But and then some other people may, I've talked to people that I view to be highly advanced in like psychic powers and all that never touch the plant, you know?
Mhm.
So it's so different. But all I know is that it certainly opens up for a bunch of different risks, like that I mentioned, on the physical level, energetic, emotional, and higher consciousness levels.
Yeah.
That, in my view, it's just not necessary, like to put ourselves through,
Mhm.
some of those challenges. And also with that, there's things like microdosing, and then also using it in a form of not psychoactive, right? Like CBD oil, or THC oil for like ailments and stuff. And I've seen really beautiful benefits with that. It's not my first recommendation, but I still feel like it's a powerful thing.
Mhm.
And one thing that I'm adding in my book, which maybe the last thing I touched on, is it was common on my path. I had some pretty like OG teachers on my path, like old like gurus, and like, people that are generally older, a bit older generation,
Mhm.
that in my view were, some of the most like high level beings that I came in contact with on my journey. The common theme behind all of them was all of them recommended not using the tools. Some of them wouldn't even work with me if I was using the tool, like psychedelics,
Mhm.
right? So that was pretty eye-opening. And then what reiterated that was two things. There was this show on Netflix about ayahuasca. I forget, it's this new series,
Yeah.
and there was a guy speaking about a topic that I had knew but I hadn't explored much. But it was basically the topic that in the old traditions of ayahuasca, for instance, it was only the shamans who took ayahuasca. It wasn't the group, because the ayahuasca shaman would take it and would open up to the songs that he had to sing to support in the healing of the group or the individual.
Mm.
That was the way it used to be done. But now, because they're poor and there's money and all that, it's really changed, right? And then the other thing is what I posted about the weed thing, right? Where when you smoke, you turn into bong water, which is hilarious, but it's so true. Um, but yeah, but it's the same thing, like I've heard some really high level elder Rastafarians who you think like, well, Rastas must be smoking,
Mhm.
but these are like the true master elder Rastafarians who are all juicing and doing the raw diets and all that, and they don't recommend smoking it. They only recommend like juicing it or actually eating it.
Mm.
So at least marijuana, when it comes to marijuana, right? Um, so yeah, so that's like my long-winded Gemini answer of the psychedelic question, but I wanted to like cover every angle because yeah, it's quite important.